internet. So my talk is really for people. I wasn't exactly sure who was going to show up, but the reason I volunteered this talk was because I was here last time, and there were a lot of people who had never done Python before, and they looked like they had never done any kind of programming at all before. And so I thought it would be useful for me, because I'm a little bit further ahead of the total beginners, but I'm not quite where these guys are, where they know how to do a lot. I thought it would be useful for people to know what I did to get where I am. And so just for a quick background on my programming history, I started programming in high school because I was playing video games and I wanted to make custom scenarios. So I had to learn how to open the text files and change these numbers, which were the coordinates of where the people would start. And that's how I started. I started by taking something cool and just opening it up and making a small change so that it would be a little bit different. And that was the goal, to make a small change that would make it a little bit interesting. After, I didn't major in programming in college. I did psychology and philosophy. But then after college, I was thinking about what I wanted to do, and I realized that programming is a great field to go into because it's very amenable to working remotely, and it has a much younger culture. So it's not like law, where if you go into law, you have to wear the suit, you have to do all these things that's not that fun. So I started studying programming again after college, and I learned a bunch of different things, and now I'm using it to automate my work, and I'm also hoping to eventually get a job as a programmer or a web developer or something like that. So that's just to give you a rough idea of who I am. I'm not a computer expert. So now I'm going to talk about how many people here are total beginners at programming, never done anything, or you're just trying to start out. Okay, we got 1, 2, 3. Because I just want to make sure that I cover you guys. In fact, I have a special topic that I want to talk about to you guys. So if you are, and this is useful for the rest of you too, if any of you know anyone who doesn't know how to program, I highly recommend, and they seem like they're receptive, I highly recommend that you try to get them to start to learn. And what I have personally found works the best is, and this is going to be a little bit weird to say at a Python group, but I think that Python is maybe not the best thing to start with if you're trying to learn how to program. And I know, right. And the reason is that Python is powerful. You can do a lot of really cool stuff. But in order to do the cool stuff, you have to use modules. And you have to use something called easy install that lets you install all this stuff. Or pip. No, please, if you have something to say, just say it. So with Python, if you're doing cool stuff, a lot of the headache is in taking these new tools that someone else created and getting it to work with what you've installed. So it's like getting the whole thing set up is a bit of a headache. And I like to analogize it to video games. So the whole appeal of the Xbox and the PlayStation is that the whole thing is in one package, and you don't have to waste any time figuring out how to get it all set up. Whereas with the PC guys, they spend a lot of time getting everything set up real nice, and they can do a lot more cool things with it, but it requires a little bit of a struggle to get everything set up real nice. And it's the same thing with Apple, right? Apple versus Windows. People say they like Apple because it has everything kind of taken care of for them, and they don't have to waste any time thinking about stuff. But with Windows, you have to mess around with it a little bit more, but you can get some cool stuff too. So Python, if you are an absolute beginner, Python, I think, is going to require a little bit too much fiddling around with it to install modules that will let you do cool stuff. Like, I'll give you an example. In the past couple days, I created a Python program that will let me automatically download stuff from Craigslist, the ads from Craigslist, and then it looks for words, and it automatically sends an email to the jobs that I want to apply to, or it sends, like, if I want to buy a TV, it'll automatically send an email to that guy as soon as it gets it in the RSS. That's super cool. And I let my friends use it, and I gave them, they send me their resume, and I have it, working. The thing is, in order to get that thing to work, I had to install a bunch of modules that would let me make it talk to the email and talk to the internet. And the hard part is getting those modules working. So that the hard part is that a lot of the stuff that's cool in Python is not in the box right away. And so that's why I recommend, if you're an absolute beginner, you should learn something else before you learn Python, just to get your foot in the door so you don't get discouraged by having to install all these modules to do cool stuff, like talk to the internet. So, yeah. Right. So that's the big question. So what am I talking about? So what I recommend to people is something called auto hotkey. If you use Windows, it only works on Windows. It's called auto hotkey. And the reason I recommend auto hotkey is not as pretty as Python, like, you know, the way things work, but out of the box, you can do stuff that's really cool. Like, for example, with just like one command, they have it, basically what auto hotkey does is it moves around your mouse on the screen, and if you tell it, it can like type in stuff on the screen, and it can switch to certain windows on the screen. So you can do really cool stuff. Like, for example, just on Sunday, you know, when everybody was watching the Super Bowl, I was teaching this girl who did no programming at all. She knew nothing about programming. But I showed her in like 2 hours how to download auto hotkey. It's really easy to download auto hotkey. It's really easy to get it working. You don't have to worry about like the version being right or anything. And then with just like a couple, all you need to know is like 2 or 3 phrases, and you can have it typing stuff out automatically. So for example, if you have an extranet or an intranet in your office, and they're constantly logging you out of your email, you can have this one keyword, and once you learn how to use it, it's real easy. It takes you 5 minutes. It'll type out your password for you, and then hit enter. I know that's a security thing. You shouldn't do it, but you know, whatever. So that's why I recommend that you start with auto hotkey and learn how to like move the mouse around and like send in the button so it'll type stuff out, and you can automate your job. I was at a job where I automated like a huge portion of my job just by having it move around and stuff. So that's for the people that are total beginners. But because this is a Python club, I'm not going to spend all my time talking about auto hotkey. I just wanted to give that heads up because my goal here, I think Python is the place where the new people should go. The people that are not used to programming, they should go to Python because Python is a lot easier to use than a lot of the other programming languages. So I wanted to be helpful to those guys that are just starting out and give them a tip about what they should do before they struggle with all the installation and like setting up, they call it setting up your development environment, where you get the whole you get your computer all set up so that you can have it do cool stuff. With Python, it's a little bit harder than with auto hotkey, so I recommend you start with auto hotkey. All right, so now I'm going to talk about what my actual talk was which was Python and flashcards. And I discovered this program called Anki, A-N-K-I. I'm going to look for it right now. I discovered this program a year ago. And it's a flashcard program. And it's really easy to install. In fact, I should probably I'm going to log out, I'm going to switch to another user, and I'm going to install it in front of you guys so you can see how easy it is. And it works, you can use it on, I have an Android phone, you can use it on Android, it's totally free. On iPhone, it costs like 25 bucks. It's the best investment you'll ever make. It's totally worth it. And they got a lot of free decks of cards that you can use to learn all kinds of different things. Like, for example, if you're learning languages, like if you're learning Chinese or Spanish or German or whatever, you can use this program to constantly remind you how to say something. And what I like to stress to people is, you know, in the old days, when you were learning something, you would have an apprenticeship, right? So when Benjamin Franklin was trying to get a job when he was a teenager, he became an apprentice to his own older brother, who was a printer. And I would ask you, what is the point of being an apprentice? Well, the point is that you just kind of sit there and you do the boring stuff that they don't want to do, but this is the key. You learn by watching them and seeing them do the stuff over and over again until it's just kind of beat into your head, and then you know how to do it yourself. So nowadays, it's not as easy to get an apprenticeship. If I wanted to, I probably would have a lot of trouble getting a programming apprenticeship. Nobody does that anymore. So the question is, how can you get that kind of experience where you see the same basic stuff over and over and over again until you know how to do the basic stuff? How can you get that experience if you can't get an apprenticeship? Well, in my opinion, the way to do that is with the flashcards. And so let me show you how to get it installed. So you just go to Google, you type in Anki. You go to the first link, Anki SRS. SRS stands for Spaced Repetition Software. And it's like its whole field. They have another one called Super Memo that was really popular in the 90s, and I think people still use it. Yeah. So now you just click download, and it brings it down here, and you got Mac, Linux, all this. So you click on, I have Windows, so I click download for Windows. 25 megabyte download. And the other cool thing is that it stores all of your flashcards online, so if your computer blows up or if you're at someone else's house, you can check it, you can do it on their house as well, and you can do your flashcards straight in the browser. So I discovered this a year ago just from like randomly browsing on the web, and I have used it to do a bunch of different things. And actually, before I even bring that, do I not have admin access? Well, let's pretend that it worked, right? So, because I don't have admin access, I'm just going to go back to my other profile, and but that's how you do it. You just click on that button, and it's done. It's really easy. So I want to tell you a story. I got these cousins that live in upstate New York, and they live out on this, it's basically like on a farm, and they're homeschooling their kids, and they live in this tiny house that's like literally smaller than this area that we're sitting in. And I was visiting them this one time, and I was watching their daughter, who was like in 4th grade, do her homework. And what she was doing was the long multiplication, where you do like 557, 8, times 35, right? And I was watching her do her homework. This is the way that she was doing that multiplication. She had this big chart, and for every single, you know how it normally works, right? You go to the right, and you do the multiplication of the thing on the right times all the top, and then you go to the next one, and you do all the multiplication. She had this chart of the times table, and for literally every single multiplication, every single mini multiplication, she was looking it up on this times table. So she was looking up 5 times 8, and she had this huge chart, and she had to look it up, 5, 8, and she had like 40 problems that she had to do like this. And I just looked at that, and I'm like, oh my God, right? That's not the way you're supposed to do it. But it was like an epiphany for me, because it made me realize that there are going to be times when you have to put in an investment to memorize something that you're going to be using a lot, so that when you're working on some other project, you don't get bogged down in all of these stupid little details that are going to slow you down and make you give up, right? That's the key. You don't want to lose your motivation. And so I thought that was like a really cool story, because it made me realize that I was making that same mistake with a lot of my projects that I was working on, where I would, because I'm starting out, because I don't have a bachelor's in computer science, I don't have some kind of external motivation to make me keep going if I'm working on a project that's really being a headache, right? If I'm learning some new language like Java or Python, and I run into all these problems, my motivation is gradually going to go down and down and down and down and down. And what would happen to me is that after like a week or two of nonstop problems, I would give up, and then I would stop working on that language totally for months. In some cases, like 6 months, I would go without doing any programming because I lost my motivation. So what I was thinking to myself, this had happened several times, and I would go for months without doing any programming. I thought to myself, how can I get over this problem? How can I get over this problem of I'm working on a project, I'm running into all of these problems, I lose my motivation, I give up, and I stop working for months. And the conclusion I came to was that what I should do is focus entirely on some kind of way to repeat these basic tasks that I'm going to have to do when I'm working on that project. Repeat those tasks over and over and over again at some low level every day, so that even though I'm not doing any big project, over time, through that tiny investment every day, I'm building up this bank of knowledge that I can use if I decide to start some project. And what that does is it reduces the barrier to entry when you're trying to start a project. If you don't know anything about some language, like if you say, oh, I'd really like to do this thing in Java, but I don't know anything about Java, you might have this like big mental block where you think, oh, I'm going to have to learn how to do this, and then I'm going to have to learn how to do that, and that makes you stop from even starting. And what I learned was that if you can use these flashcard programs to reinforce those basic steps, like how do you download the program so that it works? How do you open a new file and get something basic running? You can make flashcards that will force you to never forget how to get started on a project, so that even if you lose your motivation, you always remember how to start a project. And that way, it's a lot easier for you to if you have an idea for something, it's a lot easier to get started because you don't have all of those barriers to getting started. You've already put in that little bit of investment every day into how to get over that barrier. So this is the program. And I'm going to start it up. Does anybody have any questions? Use flashcards to learn. Right. Well, that's the thing. With this program, you can do anything. You can make it, yeah, you can put video, you can put audio, you hit a button and it records your voice and you can. Right. It's really easy to do. Yeah, I would say it's not as large as you might think. Like with Python, they have like 20 people that have posted their decks, but the problem right now is that there's no coordinated way of organizing people into creating really useful. And one of the things that I recommend you do is create your own cards whenever you run into a problem. Whenever you run into something that stops you for 10 minutes and you're trying to figure out the answer, and it's something that you're going to run into over and over again, or you think you may run into it over and over again, like for example, an error message. When you get that error message, what does it mean? Well, a lot of the time you can just Google it and you'll get a pretty quick answer. But sometimes when you Google it, you don't get a good answer. And in those situations, I think it's very valuable to create a flashcard that will remind you in the future what that error message might indicate when you see it. And so that's like an example. It's just like with my cousin's story where anything where you're going to see it over and over again, like the multiplication, you want to put the time, you want to invest the time to try to memorize it so that you'll be able to come up with a quick answer. So I think the big difference with programming nowadays versus like learning mathematics or like a language is that with programming, the body of knowledge that you might need to know is so vast that a lot of the time you just have to Google a lot. You have to Google a lot of what you're doing because on one particular project you might have to use this one module that you've never used before, and then you might not use that module again for 5 years. And so in that situation, you have to be good at Googling the problem. But I think that in itself, that realization that you have to get good at Googling stuff, that is the kind of thing that you would want a flashcard. You would want a flashcard, I had this problem, how did I fix it? And the answer would be something like, well, I Googled this, and then I did this, and then I found the answer like that. Just reminding yourself of those kinds of victories is going to help you in the future whenever you're dealing with. Another story that I like to share is that when I was studying Chinese in college, I was having a lot of trouble memorizing the characters. And it was my first semester, I was basically flunking. And once I just by chance happened across the method of using flashcards in different segments, where you have different groups of flashcards that you review at different intervals. So for example, I had 3 piles. I had a pile that I would review every day, I had a pile that I would review every week, and then I had a pile I would review every month. And by breaking up the flashcards like that and forcing myself to repeat the cards until I had it down, and then moving them gradually from one deck to the next, I was able to vastly improve my ability at using the cards. And now right now I have decks that are in German. I'm learning German, Spanish. I was learning ASL, sign language, people's names. I was learning mathematics. I was learning important. And you need to have that stuff kind of pop into your head when it's going to be interesting. And so that's what I think the flashcards are so. But in the past year, I've just kind of been experimenting with them. So one of the problems is you have to figure out what the right balance is between the investment that you're doing into memorizing the cards and the time you're losing by putting in all that time memorizing the cards. And I don't know the answer to that yet. I'm still in the process of figuring that out. Because you want to memorize things that you're going to see over and over again, but there's a real danger where you might just start investing time into memorizing stuff that you're not. So for example, I have stopped studying the language ones because I realized that I was spending a lot of time every day, like 30 minutes every day, learning this stuff, and it made me really think, what is the situation in which I'm going to use this information that is worth the cost, worth the amount of time that I'm giving up. So right now it says syncing, and that means that it's syncing with the online thing. And so now you can see this is a screen where you have all of the different decks that you're learning. When you start, this whole thing is blank. Like if I switch my profile to my LSAT student, okay, so this is my LSAT student. So when you start with Anki, your page is going to look a little bit more like this, where it's basically blank, and you're going to have these things. So this is for the LSAT. She's studying for the law school admission. So she has these cards where hers isn't working. Well, I'm going to go back to mine. She's still learning how to use it. But basically, all you have to do is drag an image. Let me show. So I'm learning, this is ASL. They have it broken, you can have it broken into kind of like folders or subfolders. You can hit the plus sign or you want to study each. So if I click on this folder, this is level 1, 15 cards. Study now, you see a GIF, it's GIF, right? You see a GIF where she does this motion, and your goal is to figure out, well, what does that mean? So I honestly have not studied these cards in like a couple weeks because I've been extremely busy I'm working at a startup right now, and I'm working like 12-hour days. So a lot of these are going to, but in this case, I think this is, I don't even remember. But so what you do is you hit space, right? Hard of hearing. So that's what that means. Now you see at the bottom, it has these 4 different buttons. Again, hard, good. Things up above it tell you, they're supposed to tell you, I think, approximately when. One of the problems with Anki is that I don't think that works quite right, or maybe I still have to figure it out, where right now, I see the cards a lot. I see the cards frequently, maybe more frequently. I ended up hitting easy a lot more. But what I would do is I would hit again, and then I would keep working on these other ones, and it would show me at the bottom, you see this orange one in the middle, there are these three numbers, 0 on the left, and then this 8 on the right that's green. The ones that are green are the ones that I still need to do for that day. The ones in the middle that are orange, those are ones that I said that were difficult for me, and I'm going to be seeing them again. The ones on the left that are blue would be totally new ones. So green is things that I have to review that day. Orange are ones that I indicated that I needed. And then the blue would be totally. Yeah. Searchable, yeah. So you see this button here at the top, it says browse. You click on there, and you have this thing up at on the left that lets you can have tags on different cards, but you can click on whole collection, you can search up at the top, and you can search like hearing, and then boom, you get everything that has the word. So the guy that made this, he did a really good job, and it's totally open source, so you can, and it's made in Python. I should have said that. This program is made in Python. Play around with it. So it's really cool. And then you can look at just your current deck. So here's a great example. I'm using this program to learn knots, because knots are something that if you know them in the right situation, they can be extremely useful. And if you don't know how to tie a knot, you can waste a lot of time trying to untie something that. And the problem with knots is that you don't need to use them that often. It's just that, maybe once in a while in some random situation, knowing how to tie a knot would be useful. But if you use Anki, you can review how to tie knots in an easy way to the point where in that random situation, you will go, oh, I remember how to do this. So for example, just randomly, I got a PC from somebody off Craigslist, and I carry a little bit of string around with me since I started learning how to tie knots. And he gave me this cart that I could put the PC on, but there was no way of securing the PC to the cart. But because I had that string with me and I knew how to tie the knots, I was able to, get it all figured out. So that's like an example of how you can use this program to study random that ends up being, and you can put images in there. Browse. Just drag images straight in there. It automatically converts the images to PNG. It automatically puts it in its own folder where all of its images are, automatically downloads it to the cloud. All of this is totally free. Great question. So what you do to create a deck, you see this button at the bottom called Create Deck. You just click that, you put in the name, so I'll just call this ASDF. And then it's sorted alphabetically. Oh yeah, it is sorted alphabetically, but the capital letters go. So I click on that. So now this is the new deck. So if I want to add a card, you just go to this button at the top called Add. You click there, and you get this window. Now with this window, you can just go to your hard drive and drag images onto it. You can drag audio. You can just download stuff. So if I go to So if I click, there's a way to download. What you can do is you can just download stuff off Google. When it downloads, it'll show up in the bottom left. And you just literally you hold down the button, you drag it to here, and then you drag it into the window, and you just drop it in there, and it immediately saves it. So if I search I got it in my flashcard now. It's that easy. It's really, they make it really, really easy to add new things. Same exact thing with audio. You just download the audio, you just drag it over, and boom, you've got the audio in your... If any of you guys know math, it works with LaTeX or latex. LaTeX? LaTeX. It works with LaTeX. So you can download a module. It's going to require a little bit of fidgeting, but you can download a module that has LaTeX, and you can put all this fancy formatted stuff. So I can show you some of my math ones. Okay, so here's an example. So you see seamlessly in the... Yeah, well, you get the point, right? You can have the... Another one, Greek alphabet. I'm trying to learn math, but I don't know the Greek alphabet, so when they show what they're talking about. So what I do is I just drag it from Google into here, and now I've got the Greek alphabet memorized. And this is the key thing, because when I'm studying those math books, that's like a perfect example of what I was talking about with my cousin. When she was doing the math thing, she had this stupid stuff that she had not memorized that was slowing her down when she was trying to do that task. And she should have focused on memorizing that stupid stuff so that she could waste less time when she was working on the bigger task. And this Greek is exactly the same thing, where if I'm reading a math book and I don't know how to pronounce a Greek symbol, that is going to slow me down again and again and again. But if I just use this flashcard program to memorize what the Greek symbols are, that is going to remove that barrier once I decide to work on that larger project. So that's the way you should look at it, is if you have this big project that you want to do, but you always lose motivation when you start because it seems like such a huge thing, just pick off one piece of it and say, I'm just going to focus on memorizing how to do that part. And then just put it in your flashcards and then come back to the project in like a couple weeks or a couple months, even if you need to do it over that kind of time horizon. Huh? I create a deck. Add card. Ah, yeah, right. Good question. Thank you for asking that. Yeah, any of you have questions or comments? I would much prefer this to be a dialogue instead of just me talking, because I'm going to forget stuff. And so if you ask questions, it's going to remind me of stuff I should cover. So what I did was I chose a type of, you have different kinds of cards. Usually it's just basic, which just has the front and the back. But what I would often do is I would want to test myself on knowledge in two different ways. Like, so for example, if you're trying to learn Python and you want to learn how do I, like, what does enum mean? What does that mean when you see it? But you also want to know, well, if I have this task that I want to get done, and enum is like, you know, if the guy who knows Python, he says, oh, enum is the tool for that. But if I don't know Python, and I want to know, well, what keyword should I use to do this task? You want to test yourself in both directions. You want to test yourself, if you see the word, what does that word mean? And you also want to test yourself, if I need to do this task, what keyword do I need to use to get that task done? And that's what the reverse does. If you just put in like, this is the syntax in Python. Well, I mean, that's not a great example. If you see this, you'll probably know what it is. So like you could test yourself, well, if I see that, on one side, like it's going to show you a flashcard where the front of the flashcard is the top part. And then your goal is going to be to figure out, like to answer, well, what is that? What is that doing? And then you'd have to produce the answer. Well, that is going to iterate through something. And then you might have the other opposite question where if I want to iterate through something, how do I do that in Python? Like, what is the syntax for that? Because that's another example of something that can slow you down. If you are trying to work on a project and you just keep hitting again and again against the syntax of the language, and you're saying, you know, this is wrong, that's wrong, no, you're not doing this right, that can really mess up your motivation. And so memorizing the syntax is like one of the best ways that you can really help yourself get started on projects, because you don't constantly get dragged down by those little things. So that's what the reverse is. All you do, you just type anything. If you just type anything in this field, it will automatically add a reverse card, in which the bottom one is the front of the card and the top one is the back of the card. So what I usually do is, why there, like yes, I think it's just as a reminder to me of how that field works, where all you have to do is put any kind of stuff in there, and it will add a reverse card. So I just put Y. So that's what that's for, and that's super useful. I think that's really. Yeah, I'm going to be totally honest. With a lot of this stuff, I still don't know how to do it. So with this, these are buttons, honestly, that I have not played around with that much. This looks like, these are different boxes that you... So one thing that people do sometimes is, if you're dealing with like a vocabulary word, you have different properties of that word. Like, so you have the part of speech, you might have the gender, if it's like a certain kind of language, you might have like whether it's singular or plural. Each of those are like properties, and you can have those properties in different boxes so that you can organize that information in a certain way you can like format each field in a separate way so that it all looks pretty. It just basically adds another white box. Yeah. So what you do, that's a good question. I don't really remember. It's like I had to Google it, and you have. Yeah. So he was questioning how do you get LaTeX working with this thing? LaTeX is what lets you put the formulas so that it looks pretty. And so I think the hard thing for me was you have to install LaTeX on your computer. It's like a programming language like Python and PHP, in that you need to have like a program on your computer so that it'll do the work of like generating the picture. And so that was the hard thing for me, was downloading LaTeX. And then I mean, you could just try it right now. If you just Google LaTeX for Anki, and then there we go. Like, you can usually find somebody who's talking about it on their blog, and they'll help you figure out how to get it working. I would say there's a lot of good YouTube videos out there. There's a really cool video that I saw where this guy, he's studying medicine. He's going to go to med school. And he's got this picture of this, he's got this picture of this, like, this person out of a textbook, and it's got all this stuff labeled, right? And they have this thing for Anki where you just drag it into this add-on for Anki, because all these people create add-ons because it's all open source. They got this add-on where you just drag a box over all these different words that are pointing to the different parts of the body, and then it makes all of them blank, and it adds a card for each part of the body where it says, well, what is this part of the body? What is that part of the body? And so it takes him like 10 seconds to make a card, like to make 30 cards for all these different parts of the body. So you could use that you might be able to use that in different circumstances. I don't know, but the point is that there are a lot of cool add-ons for Python. The number one thing that I want to show you guys before I forget is how to sync your stuff on your computer to online. That is something that can be kind of confusing. You have to go to this button in the top right there. It's synchronized. But, well, in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new account. Because what you do is, if you have not created an account, you have to create an account on the online site. If you have not done that, it will ask you to. And that's actually pretty easy. Name and a password. I think the hard part is just yeah, I would say the PC is where you're going to want to create the cards. This is going to be useful when you're on the bus and you got 5 minutes. Yeah, so he's asking, are they publicly available or private? Everything on your computer is going to be private unless you choose to share it. And I honestly, I have shared something, and I don't remember how I did it. Yeah, right. So unless you go through unless you put in the extra effort to make your thing publicly available, it is private. It's just like email. No one's going to be able to get in there. And so, I mean, unless there's like some kind of security thing, right? You know, they're always trying to do that. The other thing I want to say is, how do you get shared cards, right? So you go down to this button right here, and you click Get Shared, and then it's going to bring you to this website. And then you can click on all these different buttons for all these different subjects, but you might see, like, look, there is no programming link. So does that mean there are no programming cards? Well, no. It took me a while to figure this out, but you just go to this search thing, and you type in the name of the language that you're trying to learn, and then you don't hit enter. But that took me some. Just click on search, and then you get the list of all of the flashcards that are publicly available and in that database that have that word in it. So you can see there aren't a lot for Python, right? I think this is a very new thing, right? It's not very new, but I don't think it's really taken off the way it should. I really think that this is the best way this is a really good way of learning stuff, and there still isn't a good way to find good cards. I would say, if I had to guess, the #1 problem with this program, in my opinion, is that there is no way to charge for your cards. And so there are no companies that have developed cards for this program. I think that if they added a feature where people could charge like $1, like an app store in your iPhone, I mean, he's rolling his eyes, but I don't know. I think if you could charge like $1 for your cards, you would see people generating really good flashcards. But the guy I think people have been asking for a long time, and he just refuses to allow people to charge for stuff. I mean, he's refusing to add that feature. I mean, it's open source, so you could probably create I don't know what the license says about that. So that's how you do that. Type in Java, search. Now, in order to check out the flashcards, it's going to be a lot of trial and error right now. What I would do is I would go and I would look at this stuff on the right, and this tells you how many flashcards are in the deck. This tells you how many of the flashcards have audio, and this tells you how many flashcards have. And those audio and images are really mainly relevant for languages. It might be relevant. So what I do then is I click on the info here, and you can see a description where they talk about it. You can see when they last updated it. You can see 3 examples of cards. If it has something like LaTeX in it, it's not going to show the actual image. It's just going to show the LaTeX code. So then what you do is you just click download. You download it, and then it immediately imports it. It's really easy, right? So now it's immediately in your program. The guy did a really good job. He made it really easy to use. So now this is the card. What you can do is, if you're using someone else's deck and you find that some of the cards are useful but other cards are not useful, you just go to this button down at the bottom right, more, you click there. Okay, so you can suspend. I'll be honest, I don't know the ins and outs of this program. But basically, if you're finding a card's not useful, you can get rid of it. It's not like you have to take it entirely. And so you can just. So as for how you would use it, so this is all my stuff for programming. I have Java. What I like to do is I like to break it down, just like how when you're making a program, you have to break it down into different like small functions. You want to keep everything nice and tidy. I try to do the same thing with my flashcards, where I don't just have one big deck for Java, or I don't have just one big deck for even Excel. I break it down into each kind of like little module of information, so that, for example, with Excel, I would go through first, and I would want to memorize all of the functions, and then I would go through again, and I would want to memorize all the shortcuts. I would say even just having a giant functions thing in Excel is probably being too broad. You should probably break it down even more into like financial functions and like searching for data functions. So that's, I think, the way it should be. But they really don't have a way of collaborating online to create something like that. And so that's something that I think they should really do, to allow people to like, yeah. Huh? Great question. Thank you for asking. Yeah, so this is another thing that I recommend. I personally recommend that you download flashcards not strictly about programming so that you can use those experiences to inform how you create flashcards for programming. So for example, with me, the first deck that I'm going to get to your answer. This is all relevant. So with me, one of the first decks that I downloaded was the German, like this German ones. And so I was playing around with these things and seeing how this one has audio and this one has a picture. And I would see good decks and bad decks, and I would see what worked, what helped me, and decks that were not helpful, that did not help me. And what I found, to answer his question, because his question is, well, how do you go about learning a programming language when you're doing stuff, is you don't want to start off with really advanced stuff. You don't want to do stuff that's going to ruin your motivation. This is something I have to stress over and over and over again. It's all motivation. If you can keep yourself motivated, you're going to make a lot. If you keep yourself motivated, there's a good chance that you're going to be really successful. If you lose motivation, then it's going to be a lot harder for you. So personally, what I do is I spend a lot of time thinking about how to stay motivated. And the way to do that, if you're learning a language, to answer his question, sorry, I'm kind of like speaking around it, is start with small things. So for example, with learning a human language, what I would do is memorize basic nouns first. Don't start off with a huge sentence. Start with nouns. Just memorize the noun for this object and the noun for that object. And start small so that you don't lose motivation because, yeah. So now to bring that to programming, what I would recommend you do is start with basic things like how do I install Python on a computer? That's the kind of thing that you can, once you know how to do that, it can make you feel more, it can be a challenge. If you're new to programming, it can be a challenge to just install something on your computer. And then you could add another flashcard saying, how do I create a Python program on a computer? And that requires that you understand how to start idle. You might ask yourself, what is idle in Python? And you might ask yourself, what is the command prompt? All these kinds of basic things. So what I would do is I would say, how do I download Python? How do I create a new Python program and open it up so I can start doing stuff in it? And then I would create another one saying, how do I print to the screen? That's the classic thing that you want to do in programming. How do I print to the screen? And what is the syntax for that? And then the syntax is a huge thing that'll keep you from doing stuff. And then I would do all the basic things. So what I do is I just go to the documentation. It's basically a way of memorizing the documentation. I go to documentation, I look at the list of all the functions, and I start looking at the ones that I think are going to be the most useful in the near future. And I just take those ones, I copy the name of the function, I put it in the front of the card, and then I put what the function does, I put that on the other side, and then I hit the option for reverse, so I see both what the function says, and I have to remember what it does, and I also see the description of what the function does, and I have to remember what it says. A great example of this is my deck for processing. Processing is just like a visualization software built on Java. So what I do is, so here's a good example of a thing with, what is wrong with the code below? And it's like a test of your syntax and something. This is an example of a card that would be too advanced for somebody who's just starting out. Right? You would need to know how to start a program first. You wouldn't want to start with a card like this if you know absolutely nothing about processing, because it's going to be demotivating. You're like, I have no idea what's going on. This is for when I was learning how to do vectors. Okay, so basically what you want to do is, so here's a great example. I put the name of the function on the front of the card, and then on the back I have to remind myself, well, what does this function do? In this case, it's kind of self-explanatory. It just tells you when, it's a function that's called every time the person lets go of the mouse. And then you might see something like this. And the question is, well, is this checking the name of a string, or is this checking the length of a string, or is this checking the length of an array? This is the kind of thing that if you don't memorize this, it's going to just drive you insane. Little things like this are just going to drive you insane. So you want to memorize that. Well, that's kind of self-explanatory. But you also can put
So what I did was I just copied the documentation into this flashcard, and I removed any reference to the name arg. And so what my goal is when I'm studying this card is I want to memorize the syntax of using the function. Like, what are the different arguments that I have to pass to the function in order to make it work? Because it's, again, little things like that, like knowing what arguments have to be passed and in what order. Little stuff like that is just going to drive you nuts if you're starting out learning. So it's really useful to just memorize that stuff. And a lot of the time, there aren't even that many functions that you really need to know in order to like get started. And it really, if you memorize it for the functions that are used the most often, it really cuts down on the amount of time that you don't want to get interrupted. That's the thing. It's like, have any of you read about flow? The whole thing with flow is it's got to be uninterrupted. So if you're constantly getting interrupted by, I don't know how to do this, I don't know how to do that, and I don't know how to do that, it ruins the experience, and it's a lot harder to stay in the zone. So that's why you want to memorize this stuff, so that you stay in the zone because that's a great feeling. So like, what is this function? This is the name of the function. What does it do? You know, even these are a little bit too long, but you can see that what I did was I got rid of the name. In the documentation, that F was the word size. And I removed the word size and I put F so that, spoil it when I was looking at this at the front of the card. Another example is Excel, memorizing, strictly related to Python, but it's kind of the same idea, memorizing shortcuts that you can use. So I don't personally use Vim, but I've heard people say that like if you know the shortcuts in that program, you can work really efficiently. And I've seen that with Excel, where if you memorize shortcuts, you can do a lot of cool stuff, and you can do it really fast, and it just makes it a lot more pleasant to work with that thing. And so that's memorizing the shortcuts of a development environment is an example of the kind of thing that I think is like, in the past, I would not have done it because it was too unwieldy. There was no easy way to memorize the shortcuts. But now, when you just can carry that thing around on your phone and just invest a little bit of time every day, it just makes it a lot easier to memorize those kinds of things that a lot of the time when somebody's going on a job interview and they say, oh, I've been working with this program for 5 years, a lot of the stuff they're bragging about is just knowing the shortcuts so that they can get stuff done faster. So if you can put yourself at a huge advantage if you know if you can quickly memorize how to do stuff. I mean, I don't know how long I've been talking, but he told me that it was about 5 minutes. Anybody have any questions? Yeah. Right. So you meant like using web scraping? Yeah. So one of the first, I think it was like the first DC Python group I went to when it was at the other place, I asked if anybody could help me with web scraping to do it automatically, because I don't know enough to do that yet. Somebody said they would, but then they didn't do anything. So yeah, I think that's a huge opportunity if you know enough about web scraping that you could create these things automatically. That would be extremely helpful. So, well, what you would want to do is, that's a good question. That's a really good. What you can do is you can import cards as text separated by tabs or semicolons. So you can scrape it off the web, format it like the way it needs to be formatted, and then import it in that way, and then that'll be the fast way to import it. But that's something that I really wanted to do, because a lot of this stuff I'm doing by hand, and it's just that's what I was saying. Is like a lot of the things that I don't like about Anki is just that the work that goes into creating the cards is a huge hassle, and that's annoying. So if they had people creating quality cards, it would make it even better, an even better experience. That's a good question. That's a good point. Right. That's a really good point. That's a really good point, because that's something that people say a lot, is that the process of creating the study guide, the process of creating the flashcards is what really helps you learn, or it helps you learn as much. In my experience, and the reason I'm saying this is, from my experience with this German deck in particular, I did not create this German deck, but it really helped me to get interested in German, and having it all there and like easy to use, it reduced the barrier for me to get started. So what I would say is, you're absolutely right. If you have the motivation to push through any aggravation involved in creating the cards yourself, if you can push through that, then creating the cards is going to be a great learning experience. It's just like learning about computers. Like if you can push through the difficulty of learning how to build a computer or do any kind of basic stuff, then you're going to get a great learning experience. But for the people that have more trouble motivating themselves how to use a computer, then using an Apple where everything's just kind of done for you might be an easier way for them to like get eased into the experience. That's a great question. That's something that I think they need to add, is that right now there's no way to, I think this is the future. I'm gonna just like talk about, I have some like crazy ideas. I was a psychology major in college, and what they used to do, this guy named B.F. Skinner, he would get a rat, and he would put it in this box, and he would like not feed the rat, he would only feed the rat like 75% of the food, so the rat was always hungry. And then they would use food as reinforcement, and they would say to the rat or the pigeon, like, all you have to do is press this bar, and you get a thing of food. And they were able to use that to train pigeons how to dance, to train animals to do all kinds of crazy things. I think, in my opinion, if you did something kind of similar to that with people, where, like people in prison, for example, if you have them in that thing, I really think it could work. I really think it would. Yeah, that's one of the books that B.F. Skinner came out with. So it's good to see people like know what he's talking about. But I really think that one of the problems, like when you're a kid, what your parents do is they say, oh, if you do this, then I will give you this reward. But we live in a society right now where you can just like buy anything. So it's like there's no, well, yeah, money's the reward, but a lot of the time it's hard for people to overcome, it's hard for people to delay satisfaction. And so if people are like, if people say, oh, I'm going to reward myself with a candy bar for doing this thing, what inevitably happens is you do it for one day and you reward yourself with a candy bar, and then the next day you just buy the candy bar and you don't do the activity anymore, right? Because that's the way people are. That's the way I am. I don't know about everyone else. So I think if they had a thing like that, where it's like a boot camp, or like people talk about the same thing with joining the army. They say, oh, the army cleaned up my life. The army turned me into the man I am today. And I think, maybe that's not always the case, but I've seen that with people. And I think the reason is that it's like that kind of structured environment where you force people into a situation where they have to go through this activity that allows them to do things that they would not have otherwise been able to do if they were in their original environment. A lot of people, if they stay in the same environment, it's really hard for them to motivate themselves to do great things. And so I think that one of the big things in the future is they're going to be taking people are going to volunteer. They're going to say, please, let me go into this environment for 3 months, and they're going to fix me up, and I'm going to do these flashcards. And then after 3 months, of helping me stay motivated to do this task, then I'm going to come out like a much better person. I think people would voluntarily do that. And people do that with the weight things, where they join this camp where they like learn, they're forced to do it. So it's, that to get back to your question, I think that's a great idea. I think that's going to be the future. I think the fundamental problem is that these programs, as they are created right now, have no leverage over you. There's nothing that they can give you that will overcome any kind of like feeling that you have that you don't want to do it. And so until they have that, until they have something that will motivate you, some kind of, what do they call it, extrinsic or external motivator, until they have that, then I don't know if it's going to be that useful. They have all these websites where they say, oh, you can earn points. Who cares, right? What do I need points for? You need to have some kind of control over that person's environment if you want to have them reacting, if you want to make it rewarding. So, yeah, that's the matrix. So any other questions? Okay. Yeah.